His specialty is bonsai, but please do not let that fool you. He is an excellent plant person. And when he gave this presentation to the Bonsai Club, I immediately thought I have to have him for this club. So he has been gracious enough to modify it as much as possible for us. So Ryan, take it away.
Thank you, Moss. I don't know how you want to situate this, but I'm going to walk around a little, so I'll make your job difficult. All right. But nice to meet everyone. It sounded like when we were talking before everybody came that we have a lot of people that are very advanced. Are there anybody that identify more as beginners in the plant world here? Okay, no shame, no shame. I like to tailor, the extent of the information that I'm giving to all audiences as best I can. So this presentation, I'll say, my goal is to use a lot of scientific papers on plant research to try to help guide your thinking about how can I make your indoor growing environment as optimal as possible for your cacti, your succulents, any other type of plant that you want to grow. So first, I want to say I am an OSU teaching assistant, so we do a lot of active learning there. And I know it may have been a while since you all have been in a school environment, but we're starting with the research component now. Active learning is the best way to learn things, so I'm going to try to throw out some questions here or there for you guys to discuss. And so I want you to start by introducing yourself to your neighbors if you don't already know them. I bet that a lot of you already know each other. And since we have a relatively small group, maybe you can just inform me a little bit about your cacti and succulent growing. And one question I had was, how many of you already have tried using grow lights or a grow tent or something like that?
Not very successful.
Okay, that's good to know. So discuss for a minute with each other about maybe your attempts with indoor growing and what has worked for you and what has not worked for you.
I just want to know, did you plan to match that beautiful bonsai?
I did not, but I'm really glad that it worked out that way.
That's pretty wild, yeah.
It's exact same colors.
Yeah, lucky me.
I use grow lights all over my house.
I like to augment my lamps themselves with like bulbs that are as broad spectrum as possible, so that like any lighting I already have in my house should also add the benefit of, hopefully hitting the right spots for the spectrums that my plants need. Obviously, sunlight's best, but our house doesn't get the best sunlight in all areas. So I do have a couple IKEA greenhouses I've set up, and got them all on smart lights and smart plugs and everything. So everything's pretty much automated at this point, but definitely could have some improvements. And I know I should be focusing more on the blurple lights, but they literally give me headaches. So
I hate those.
I know, I do too, and they give me headaches, and like I can't look at them in the
What kind?
eyes, like blue and
Oh,
the blue, red, and red lights.
The
It
full
just
spectrum ones are great though.
Yeah.
And they're light bulbs and they're like soft yellow. No.
Well, and they don't, you can actually see your plants. Like those blurple
Yeah.
ones, like your plants are blue and purple. Like,
there's so much eye strain. Like I look at screens enough during the day. I don't need to look at those as well. But the white ones don't always seem to do as much as the blurple ones do.
Yeah.
I primarily use lights just to start cactus seedlings.
Okay.
Because I feel that, you can't, it's very difficult to start cactus seedlings on a windowsill.
Yeah.
And if you use lights, you have a much better chance, and even better chance than growing them outdoors, because outdoors, the sun is going to be too bright for the seedlings.
Yeah.
So I think lights are ideal for starting seedlings, but you can't leave them under there forever. But and then I use lights for a few other things too. In my opinion, any house has got not enough light for plants. And I hate it when people go, put that in the south window, put that in the west window. But no window in a house has got enough light for any plant.
I have a great table that's going to prove your exact point later on.
Yeah, and so people when they say, oh, I've kept my cactus on a windowsill, yeah, they will sit there and slowly die for years, but yeah, that's what you do is with a cactus indoors on a windowsill, especially if it's a
You
double
should
pane
know
insulated
drainage.
window, it's a slow death if you don't move them outside in the summer.
So on that note, has any of you spent a period of time growing without grow lights and then noticed a big difference in your plants once you started using them?
I will find out this winter.
Okay.
I just got my last Christmas, my boyfriend's mom got me some really El Cheapo LED grow lights, and I checked the spectrum, and I did do a little bit of research. They're okay, but we're gonna set those up in the solarium and see how it works this winter. We'll see.
I take a lot of my cactus and succulent type plants. I usually keep them outside. You know, sometimes I have them like in north face so they don't get too much sun. I'll just leave it enough, and then like in the winter, didn't do it last year. We moved, but use some lights or as supplements. I basically don't drink them winter time. They don't really grow much. Maybe they just sort of go dormant, but it keeps them still growing and green. And
Yeah.
better than if they were just like not. So
Yeah.
We had like 100 Sansevieras in the basement this last winter that we just didn't do anything with, and
they have
no light, nothing. Like the only water they were getting was like with the basement like flooded a little bit. That's all that they got, and they somehow most of them survived.
Yeah, we had last year when we didn't, because even with the solarium, it's a northeasty type of view, because my house is a corner caddy, and we have a tree that it's small, it's a crabapple, but it still, even in winter, blocks some of it, and everything lived until like my humidifier broke for a period of time, and I had to fix my heater. But this year, those should be ironed out, and it's just working on the light, and next summer it'll be the heat, which kills all half of them. Just gotta get them out now.
Well, I can share just from my own experience. I started growing, I've been growing bonsai since I was 8, and now I'm 26, so you can do the math there. But I started out growing indoors, and you know, I was a kid, so I didn't really understand how plants worked at that time. I was like, oh, if I put it outside, I can't protect it. And so I was like, if there's going to be a storm, it's going to get knocked over, an animal's going to eat it, a bug's going to eat it, you know. So I grew indoor tropical plants for about 10 years. And then I started learning more about plants. And once I started growing those same plants indoors with grow lights, I saw a much better, you know, outcome. Like this plant in particular I brought because it's a good case study for one of the benefits of grow lights and grow tents. It's kind of a more sensitive, more difficult to grow tropical plant, and that usually every winter when you bring it inside, it drops a lot of leaves. And then the first couple of years that I had it, even though I had grow lights those first years, I was not sure if it was going to survive the winter because there's only a couple leaves on it, and I kept monitoring it, checking to make sure I wasn't overwatering or underwatering, you know, just being a helicopter parent. And then I think it was 2 years ago now, I got the grow tent, I upgraded some of my grow lights, and it did much better. I think it's mainly because of more heat, more humidity, and more light being reflected and being contained in that system there. So the whole idea of improving your indoor growing system or setup, these can expand the range of species that you can grow. If you have some that are very demanding, it can enable you to grow those species, or it can enable your plants to grow faster, or to induce certain flowering phenotypes that you may not usually see. So I'm going to start by just going over the physiology of what's going on in the plant. I am actually a microbiologist in OSU's at the PhD program there. So I'm just going to briefly go over cells. This is like my domain. I'm at a microscope all day. So all you need to know basically is that you are made of cells, your plants are made of cells, and the basic, you know, I hope I'm not reviewing at too basic of a level, but just starting from that point, in case anybody had forgotten, you need your cells to stay intact to survive. Your plants need the same thing. And then your cells need to obtain energy, and we do that by eating food. The plant will do that with the sunlight. Oh wait, actually I have an animation here. There you go, now you can remember that. And after the plant is getting that sunlight and making or saving that energy from the light, is going to use that energy to make things, make new leaves, make new flowers, make defense molecules from pests and herbivores and thorns and everything else, and that will mostly come in the form of sugar. Everything that a plant makes originally starts with sugar because that's the whole process of photosynthesis. So I only wanted to go over these slides a little more in detail because last year I made the mistake of assuming that everybody remembered this stuff, and then I got some blank stares when I started to explain why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. So this is the main driver of keeping your plant healthy, having a good rate of photosynthesis. Everything has to be relatively comfortable for the plant in order for this process to keep going. And of course, the light is one of the main drivers. So I don't really need you to know all of this. All you need to know is that light comes in, the plant absorbs that, and it saves that energy in the form of a sugar. And then that is how it makes everything else. So the first condition that I'm going to talk about is temperature. And I know Mouse has a lot of outdoor hardy succulents and cacti at her house. And some of you all sound like you have some tropical plants that you bring indoors. So this is a condition that really depends on what exactly the plants are that you're growing. And there's a system which some of you might already be familiar with called the USDA hardiness zone. Any species of plant that you have, you can search up what is the hardiness zone for a euphorbia or for a barrel cactus, and then you can kind of see what is the temperature tolerance of that plant. And so as we're approaching winter, I actually asked Mouse to have this presentation at this time of year so that you can start thinking ahead for winter if you're wanting to try new things with your winter setup. Basically, we are in zone 6, this green color here in Ohio. There are a couple of cacti species here that are hardy for that zone. Prickly pear comes to mind. Someone in my community garden actually planted a little cactus area this year with prickly pear cactus. So, and then other species which are not hardy in zone 6, you will have to bring them indoors once the temperatures go below 45. And this is mostly, this particular temperature guideline is for anything that is considered tropical. And so those would be plants that are hardy to zones 10 or higher. So higher zones are more tropical areas. Okay, and here's just a practical example of what damage that a sudden freeze or an unexpectedly cold freeze can cause on your plants. So I don't know, this was back in 2021 in Texas. They had this huge winter storm, covered everything in snow and ice, and then it kind of parked there for a number of days. So they got prolonged exposure to a colder than average temperature. And this storm, in addition to all the power outages and flooding that people have experienced in their houses because they don't have insulated pipes and all that there, in the agriculture sector, they experienced 230 million in citrus crop damage, 150 million in vegetable crop, and millions more in ornamental plants that were damaged and killed from this storm. And so what exactly is going on inside of the plant when this is happening? Oh wait, that's the next slide. So here's just an example. Cacti also can be affected by sudden cold. And this is actually a plant that should be durable to cold temperatures. This is the prickly pear cactus that I mentioned before. And so a lot of it, because this freeze was so long, it became mushy, and the most exterior portions that were above the soil, which were most exposed to the cold, these parts became soft and had to be pruned off, and there were still some hard parts at the base, so the plant was able to regenerate from that after you prune away all the mushy material. But you can see even a plant that is durable or hardy to this kind of temperature, if it comes unexpectedly or for longer than the plant would normally be used to, it can still suffer dieback from that. So that's the main thing to take away from that. And now what is happening inside of the plant? So referring back to those cells, the little cells that make up all the leaves, all the stems, all the thorns. And these cells, they are surrounded by a membrane. So if you can imagine when ice forms inside of the cell, there's going to be a crystal, and these crystals can puncture the membrane. And this comes back to that first tenet that I told you. The cells have to remain intact to function properly for the survival of the plant. And cold hardy plants like, over here I have the example. This paper which found this particular protein was in Arabidopsis, which is kind of a weed plant. It's used as a model organism. So scientists love to study this one to learn more about how plants work, because it's very easy to grow in the lab, and you can do a lot of different conditions at once because you can grow it so easily. But anyways, so in those cells, if the ice breaks the membrane, this Arabidopsis plant is able to reseal the membrane and prevent the membrane from getting broken. So this is just a fun fact for you. It does not really affect your ability to grow cacti, but again, just to remind you the importance of knowing where your plants are hardy to. So now that we've gone over kind of some temperatures that can be damaging, we're going to go over what temperatures might be optimal. And again, this is really dependent on what type of cactus or succulent you're growing. So this is just an example from a paper that used some different tree species and Mexican cotton, which is more of a shrub, and then they looked at the rate of photosynthesis for these different species. And you'll see that the ones which are more cold hardy, these sycamore maple, the English walnut, and the Scots pine, these ones, the rate of photosynthesis, it kind of peaks at a lower temperature. The optimal rate of photosynthesis, the optimal rate of gathering sugar for growth is more at a lower temperature for these cold hardy species. Whereas the Mexican cotton is this one, and you can see that the rate of photosynthesis does not even reach a peak by 97 degrees. So really, if you have a very tropical plant, like this one is between zones 9 and 11, it's probably the more heat that you can give it, the better that that plant will grow. And it's hard to say exactly because every plant is a little different. So if you really, as a scientist, you would say, okay, well, we need to do an experiment for each of these plants to find their optimal, but that's a lot of work, especially if you have 1,000 plants like Doug, so we're not going to do that. I'm just trying to get you thinking, where are my plants from and what is their ideal environment? Because the house, obviously, is very different from, the desert or the rainforest or wherever your plants are from. Yeah, and there I have it. Oh yeah, so depending on how cheap you are and how much you're running your furnace, your indoor home temperature is typically between 60 and maybe 78 degrees. I don't know if anybody goes to 80, but you can see that even the temperate species, they don't reach their optimal rate of photosynthesis in that range. So this is why you may want to think about either containing the heat that your light is giving off or adding some other supplemental heat to where you're growing your indoor plants. So, and while I just said in my last sentence that heat is good, you don't want to put your cactus right next to your radiator or right next to your furnace vent. And this is something that we have problems with in the bonsai world as well. People will say, oh, well, this is a tropical plant, I gotta put it near the warmth. But the air that's coming off of this is very dry air. And more for succulents or things with leaves, it might be more of an issue because the dry air will dry out those leaves very quickly. But cactus might be a little more resistant, but still somewhat sensitive to this type of dry air proximity. So if you give it a little bit of space between your plants and your heat source, that will probably be helpful to survival. Okay, so here I talk about a couple of ways that you can control the temperature in your growing area, and I will actually use this one thing to demonstrate here. So it's good to know what exactly is your temperature. And this is a little cheap $10 thing I got on Amazon. It tells me the temperature and the humidity, and it also tells me the low and high temperatures for, I think, a given period or a given day. I think you can reset it however often you want. But it's useful so that you know what your baseline is. You know, am I in a good range or am I more at like 60 degrees, So if you don't know what is the temperature because, we might not be able to perceive exactly as accurately as this, then it will be hard for you to react in a way to plan to make your growing environment better. So, like I said, strategic placement in the house can be helpful. Some people have certain areas which are more exposed to cold, more exposed to warmth. I keep my grow tent in the basement, so it's a little cooler until we run the dryer, then it's warmer all of a sudden. Houses are not the perfect environment, but you can try to think about these things a little bit. You can also use heaters. I know that people in the reptile world, they do that kind of thing. You just want to be careful about the distance between the heater and your plant, and that might take some experimenting. And then also, the grow tent is very good at containing the heat. if you put your hand here later on, you'll feel this light is giving off a lot of warmth. And so this grow tent is usually about 10 degrees warmer than outside of the grow tent. That's been my experience from last winter anyways. Okay, so now oh, question?
Where'd you get that grow tent?
I also got that from Amazon. You might be able to find it. I know there's like some hydroponic stores in Columbus. They might sell things like that, and they might sell grow lights. Occasionally, you'll see one that's used on like Facebook Marketplace or something. So if you're not in a rush, you could browse around there. Yeah. But yeah, they come in all different shapes and sizes. You can get ones that are like 20 by 20 if you want, if you're that committed to it. So now I'm going to move on to light. And this is that table I was talking about. So this is a guy who's a bonsai artist, and he is called Monkey Bonsai. And I want to cite him because this is directly lifted from one of his videos. But once I saw this table, I was kind of naive before about how much light exactly there was in the home. And then this table persuaded me it's really not enough. So you can see full sun. There's a unit of measurement for light. It's called lux. There's a couple different units. I like this one. It's pretty easy to understand. So there's 100,000 lux. If you go outside on a sunny day with no clouds, that's how much light the sun is giving you. If you go on an overcast day, it might be half that. It might be 50,000. And then a heavy overcast day, it might be a tenth of a sunny day. So it might be around 10,000. And then the home interior, which our eyes, even with our lights, we don't think that it's that dim. But compared to the sunlight, it is a big difference. And your plant will know the difference too. So the home interior is ranging from 500 to 3,000 lux, which is 0.5% to 3% of what the full sunny day would be. So, and they also broke it down here. They say that a south-facing windowsill is on the upper end of that home interior range. So even then, you're still only at 3,000 lux. South-facing window is better, but not nearly as what it is if it's outside. So this is one of the reasons why it's great to grow your plants outside in the summer. I know some of you mentioned that you do that. And for bonsai, I saw that once I started putting my plants outside in the summer and doing grow lights in the winter, they grew a lot faster. So it really is helpful if your objective is not just to keep the plant alive. So speaking about keeping the plant alive, this is a paper where they took this model organism, kind of like the Arabidopsis. They just used a white clover, and then they grew it in different conditions. Some with these 4 different intensities of light. So one was at 500 lux, which you remember is the non-south window. That's the approximate intensity of that. Then they had one that was 2,500, and that's the equivalent of a southern-facing window. And then they had these 2 grow light conditions, which were closer to what it would be if it was outside on an overcast day. And then they monitored the rate of growth of these clovers in these 4 different conditions. And you can see the one with the window exposure, that level of light, it almost didn't grow at all. It's kind of keeping itself alive, but in this 2-week period, there's really no change. And if you're growing your cacti or your succulents on a window for 20 years, you might see some very, very gradual new leaf here, new leaf there. But it's not going to be as healthy as it could be if you grow it outside in the summer or if you grow it with a supplemental light. So you can see here the more intense grow light conditions. Basically, the more light you give it, the faster that it's growing. So that's the main takeaway from this experiment. So just hoping to be a little bit of an ambassador for science here and show you why we're doing some of the things that we're doing when we're growing indoors. So the next question is, if light is great, why don't we just leave it on all the time? And if it's in the grow tent, you're not even seeing the light because you can close that up and it doesn't have to bother you if it's in the same bedroom as you, If it's not in a grow tent, then maybe the light will bother you to look at it all the time. But so the question would become, why don't we leave the light on 24/7 for the plants? And there's a couple reasons here, but first I'll start with an observational experiment, another one. So this one, they used strawberry plants, and they measured a couple different things. They measured the leaf growth, and they measured the fruit growth. And they saw that for different amounts of light, if they grew it at about 14 hours, the leaf growth peaked and it decreased a little at 24 hours. And in the same way with the fruit growth, the fruit conditions seemed to peak around 12 to 14 hours, and more light was very detrimental to the yield, the total grams of strawberries produced. So now we'll get into why exactly is more light not productive for the plants. And especially in cacti, there's a unique thing going on there that some of you may know about. And I don't want to get into the specifics, but it's basically a different way of doing photosynthesis. And cacti will do this, and it's also in other succulent plants and other drought-adapted plants. So basically, they have a unique strategy where inside of the leaf, they have these guard cells. And pretend that my hand is the surface of the leaf. So normal plants, they open these guard cells during the day, once they detect light. And this allows air and water to pass through, so that they can obtain carbon dioxide and make sugars, and then release the oxygen back out. And in the process of doing that, a normal plant will lose water throughout the day. But cacti, the only time that they will open these guard cells is at night. So this reduces their water loss because that's during lower temperatures. And then during this nighttime period where the guard cells are open, they're absorbing carbon dioxide that they're going to use to make sugar the next day. And then once the sunlight comes, they close them again. So if you were to leave your grow lights on 24/7, then your plants would not be absorbing as much carbon as they should be in order to grow. So this is why I wanted to go over some of those kind of basic principles, kind of review photosynthesis, because cacti do have some special things going on that you have to consider.
Oh, throw it out there, crassulacean acid metabolism.
Yes, that's the one. So I had not heard of that before I started doing some cactus-specific research, so thank you all for helping me learn more about plants too. But
Did you say, Doug? I didn't play it.
Crassulacean acid metabolism. They take the carbon dioxide in and convert it to carboxylic acid with malic or oxalic acid. And so they hold it then until the day when then they can then release the CO2 and make sugar.
you sound like a biochemist.
I'm a biologist. I don't know. Chemist, but
Yeah.
Don't give yourself not enough credit, Doug.
So on grow lights, I know that you guys were talking a little bit about the spectra, the color of light that is emitted, and on the next slide we'll go into that a little more detail. But the main point that I hope all this has driven home is that any type of grow light is better than not having one at all. You don't need to go ahead and buy a multi-$100 grow light right away. You know, you can start with a little one. Like these string lights are very inexpensive. You can just see if that works for your plants for your space that you have available. And over time, if you start to get 1,000 or 100 cacti, you can experiment with getting more intense setups. So, also, if you want to easily know how strong is your grow light, there's lots of online tools for converting watts, which is what mostly you can find on a light, converting that to lumen, which then you can refer back to the table on slide 17. So later on, if you want to go back to that table and take a picture of it, totally fine with me, just let me know. And based on the research that we did, for most plants, probably between 12 to 16 should be your maximum amount of daylight or grow light exposure. So now we're getting into the wavelengths of light. And this is a whole giant rabbit hole, which I'm not going to go all the way down the rabbit hole. I'm just going to give you a taste. So you remember white light is what we all see when we go outside. That's what the sun is emitting. But it is actually a combination of all of these different colors. You know, when you see a rainbow, that is also, it's very similar to this prism, just breaking up the spectra that's in the light. And there are some experiments out there that show that the blue to purple range is better for vegetative growth and for basically photosynthesis. And this red color is more optimal for stem growth and in some plants possibly flowering also. So an interesting fact on that, if you're in a forest, the type of light that is making it through the canopy is mostly in this red wavelength. So certain plants that are more shade-loving, they might actually prefer this red light. And so I don't necessarily know for all of your species which color is going to be best. That's something you'll have to maybe do a little more digging into. But to keep it easy, I just use white lights. And my plants are fine, they're very happy. You don't have to make it complicated if that's not your goal. But you can also imagine for certain types of plants, based on their original environment, they might have a slight preference on one end of the spectrum or the other. So, any questions? Yes?
So if a light says that